Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be continuing our short series of basically the absolute basics of command modern operations. And we're going to be talking about both your views with your map layers as well as your map settings. Now, when you first jump into command, there is an intimidating number of circles and red areas and shaded areas. And now I go like this and I zoom in, and all of a sudden half the world looks nice and the other half, it's just because the rest of the world hasn't adapted high definition, obviously. But again, what is this all about? So, Baloogan, could you tell us a little bit about kind of what we have all going on our screen here?
Hey guys, I'm Baloogan. I'm here to with Philip to take a look at the view and map settings menus of command, but also just to kind of explain what the hell are you looking at here with all these lines and circles and icons on the screen. Let's tackle that today. So
Absolutely.
at the base, we've got the Sentinel-2 imagery dataset, which provides a pretty high definition, nice looking terrain. You can always turn that off. One thing about command is that you can change just about anything with the way command looks. Like we're zooming in here on Egypt, and I think that's the Nile, I would assume. Uh,
Is that the
yeah,
Suez? Yeah,
yeah, I think so.
yeah,
Or
absolutely.
no, that's not the
That's the
Nile. That's
Suez.
the Suez. Sorry. The Nile's to the left.
I was gonna say we got to go a little
But
left.
what we can do is turn off this layer if we wanted to, and just have the so yeah. If you turn off that layer, we went into the view menu. You might want to just show the guys a little bit slower there. View, and then down there. So that turns off the Sentinel-2 satellite map layer. We still have something called the BMG layer, which I actually don't know what that stands for. But if you turn that off and give it a second to load up,
Oh no, what happened to my world?
now you just get this outline of all the different borders, which is a pretty neat way to play. I sometimes like playing with this because it creates such a great contrast between the icons and the rest of the world. You can actually see what's going on. And so I guess just starting from this view, we can take a look at the icons. So that group that you've selected there is a group of four ships. One's a carrier. I'm not sure what the rest of the group composition is, but in the top left of the screen, if you select the group again, you can see in the top left there's this selected list right below where it says the time,
Of course,
and
it's all right.
you can
Oh, I
see.
get it.
Oh no, on the top left side of the screen.
Oh, gotcha,
There we go.
gotcha.
Yeah. So CVN 70, a Tycho, an FFG, and a supply ship. And so over, you can always see what you've selected over on the top left, which is really quite helpful, especially since it's very easy for a command scenario to get very cluttered. And so it's important to know what ships you're giving an order to. And you're left clicking right now in all these units, and that is how command does selection: is left click selection and then left click drag. And we're right now in group view, which means that this group, for example, when you select on, say, that Hornet to the north of the group collapses into that one icon, that double circle icon. And when you click on that, because of the map settings where we've got it set up so that when you select a group, it shows you its contents, uh, we can see the other ships nearby in the group.
Yeah, so that's kind of that. We're going to go into a lot more detail as far as unit selection and movement and plotting and stuff like that. But where we're going to take a look now is at some of the other layers that we have. So as
Yeah.
Balukan mentioned wonderfully a second ago, that the Sentinel-2 is this gorgeous satellite map. Sometimes it can take a little bit of time to load, and sometimes we don't need that level of detail, or maybe there's a different kind of level of detail. If you just turn on borders and coastline, you get what I like to call Larry Bond vision, just like
Yeah.
Balukan was saying just a minute
Yeah,
ago.
try the lat long grid as well. I like
Absolutely.
that view too.
Oh, there we
There
go.
you are. Yeah. Now that's traditional.
Oh yeah, now we're getting extreme. This is the wrong color, but I do appreciate the latitude and longitude. Obviously, as you can zoom in, you can get the specific ones. And of course, holding your mouse over any location anywhere in the world will also give you quite a bit of information. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. So I'm going to go ahead and click that off because it gets a little cluttered. And now we're
Yep.
going to go ahead and take a look at relief layer. Now, when I think of relief, I think of nice and relaxing. I don't know about you guys. I don't know. Oh no, what has happened here? Well, so much
Everything's
for
turned green.
relief. So,
Yeah.
Balukan, can you tell us what we're looking at right here?
So this is a map layer that shows the lay of the land, shows the terrain height. And so green, it starts off black, which is just any water is black in this terrain. Then you can see the kind of the brownish green there. That denotes low altitude. And then as you go up higher and higher, you see more and more kind of brownish tones. That indicates just higher and higher terrain values. This terrain information, this is the information that is used in command to figure out line of sight for radars and visual cameras. You can use these valleys to hide, to mask your aircraft when you're attacking a site. Or when you have a SAM site, you might want to be aware of these valleys and these hills and put your SAM site on the top of a hill so you have the best line of sight. So you can see these two SAM sites, and so if you click on one of those things, you can see where it says 9. That indicates that, so first off, the icon, that's just the icon for a SAM site. That's just, that means a guided missile SAM site. That's just, they decided that's what it would look like, and that's what we in command use that icon for. And the 9 indicates that there's 9 separate vehicles or 9 separate things as a part of this SAM site. And so, for example, you might need 9 missiles to really destroy this entirely. And some sites that don't have multiple vehicles, like for example, a tank platoon is like 4 tanks, would have 4 separate vehicles. And so it would have a little tiny 4 there that indicates the number of vehicles there, which would mean that it would need 4 Mavericks or 4 Hellfires to destroy. You can't just drop 1 bomb to kill 4 vehicles unless it's a really big bomb. And command does model that. So that's the reasoning behind the little 9 there. These are contacts. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say on the layers themselves. Yeah. So yeah. So basically, taking a look around the relief layer, just adding on to what Baloogan said a second ago, it does block line of sight. But keep in mind, you have to be behind the thing that you're actually blocking line of sight. If you're at 36,000 feet, none of these mountains are going to block line of sight to you unless there's like stuck inside of a little valley or something like that. But again, as you mentioned, that can be taken into from more of a tactical perspective. So the relief layer, for me personally, I love doing it for planning tomahawk strikes. A tomahawk is basically a cruise missile that you can basically launch and actually tell it what path to follow. You can also, of course, use it for low-flying helicopters, low-flying aircraft, and things like that. Smart map designers try to find the tallest mountain they can get and plop the radar sight on the top of it, preventing you from having cool places to hide.
Also, smart countries put their SAM sites on the top mountains like that too.
Absolutely. And it's kind of a fun strategy, too, a sort of a meta strategy. You could put your SAM site on the top of the hill to trick the player into going through like a valley where you put a much nastier SAM system basically waiting to trap the player. But that's modern warfare.
Or AAA, like you might have SAM to bring everyone down into these valleys, and then you fill the valleys with AAA. A lot of Vietnam scenarios could use something like that.
Absolutely. So speaking of layers, that's the relief layer. We'll go ahead and shut that off. And we're going to swing down to the Stamen terrain layer. So what is this one about?
I think it uses OpenStreetMap to just create something that kind of looks like Google Earth.
Yep. Now, one thing I will add that I really, really enjoy about this is for those of you who like to do ground unit scenarios, this is a great way to kind of zoom way, way in and, place your individual units on like individual streets and people who want to do like airports or maybe regarding this particular bridge. It's just a spectacular way to kind of get in and see what things are. Now, one thing I will ask is what's the difference between terrain and then the one that has roads and cities? Do I need to turn both those on at the same time? Because it looks like I have roads and cities here.
Yeah, so the roads and cities layer is just the roads and cities. So if you turn off the terrain and give it a second to load.
Exactly. There it goes.
There we go. So it's a terrain. It's kind of like a spider web of the roads, and basically it's just an infrastructure layer. And you can always put another terrain layer underneath this, like the relief layer. It's kind of hard to see sometimes because it's light gray on a light background. It's sometimes hard to see, but this puts the infrastructure layer on top of whatever layer that you want. So if you don't want the terrain to be just completely blown away, or you want to put on a relief layer or something like that, but still see the logistic links, this is the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do like the nice thing about Same and Terrain is it will actually give you the terrain as well. So if you actually zoom in enough, you can see some like the topographical relief of different mountains and stuff like that. Really
Yeah,
handy, and it's almost sometimes easier than relief, but relief is going to give you a better idea of what's kind of around you. So
yeah.
this is a new layer. This is kind of an interesting one called land cover. Would you like to speak about that one?
Sure. So, Command Modern Operations, or CMANO 2, has we've built in this new terrain layer where the terrain type, the underlying terrain type, like desert versus built-up city versus cropland, these have actual differences on how they behave for things like unit sighting, unit damage, unit speed for land units. It's like we've spent a lot of time making the hydrographics, the oceanography of Command really work well with all the different water layers and all that, and we're bringing some of that to the land, to the terrain system. And so we just model the different types of terrain. The big one is cities. Cities slow things down and can speed things up and can make units a lot harder to see. But like for example, desert is a lot easier to see units in than cities are. And it just gives you a little bit more of a tactical layer, a thing to deal with while you're playing with command.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely great. This is a neat way. I like this a lot for planning scenarios, almost more so than I actually find myself using it in a game. Although it's going to be a good kind of strategic SAM detector, because just looking at the little splotches of red where the people live, I'd imagine I could guess where my S200 is probably going to be located. But again,
Yeah,
it's got a little metagamey. This little screen, by the way, is a little handy dandy thing that you can turn on. This terrain type legend. It's under the map settings if you need to have an idea of what the different terrain. You can also hold your mouse over anything on the map and it'll actually read you the type of terrain as well. In this case,
yeah.
in the middle of Saudi Arabia here, you can see that we're sitting here in barren, sparsely vegetated. Not so great. Okay, so what are these custom layers about? I don't see any here.
Yeah, so there's a couple of tools that can generate custom layers which give you custom imagery over a certain position. This was especially useful before in Cimano 1, where we didn't have the Sentinel-2 layer available at the time. And so people would basically, when you zoomed in, it would just be this blurry mess. But nowadays with Sentinel-2, we don't need this layer manager, this layer system as much, but it allows you to bring in your own custom imagery. I've seen this used for first off bringing in satellite imagery of a certain location, but also when you're bringing in your own PNG into the command world, it needs to be a PNG, but also has this world file that tells command where to place it exactly, geographical coordinates. There's a couple of tools that can make these files for you, but this you can also draw on this layer. So, for example, if you wanted to draw like battle lines or even orders right onto the map, you can do that via this custom layer system.
Yeah, you'll see this a lot more in Commando, as he was just saying a second ago. A moment ago, I just turned on the place names to kind of give you guys an idea. These place names will be redundant if you're using the Stamen basically map layer here, but sometimes it's kind of nice to know the names of things. A neat
Yeah,
feature too is when you do zoom in, it'll actually give you specific names to specific areas. And I think that's kind of nice because they tend to give you the anglicized version of these, so you don't have to worry so much about the language barrier, especially when you start heading over into this general direction. But it's a really,
yeah,
really cool localization feature. Now,
yeah.
one feature I've never used personally is the day-night lighting. And you can see this one's relatively self-explanatory. It allows you to roughly see when the different parts of the planet is being lit up or it's at nighttime. You can see right now the way our scenario is set up, since it's roughly 11 o'clock in the morning local time, it's fairly lit up. By the time we scoot over here into the Chinese region, you can notice about 6 o'clock at night. Obviously, it's in October. It's going to be pretty much nighttime. I don't think there's anything else beyond that.
Yeah, well, it's important to the engine model for spotting and weapons and all that. But like day and night doesn't matter to radar. It doesn't matter to sonar, but it does matter to visual sensors or IR sensors. They like cameras or pods or anything like that that can detect units from far away using cameras. At nighttime, that's significantly degraded. During the day, it's great. During the night, you can't see shit.
Yeah, exactly. So the one last feature we have under the view page is we have the 3D view. Assuming you've bought TAC View and set it up correctly, the 3D view basically is going to give you literally a 3D view basically rendered by this external application to let you see what's kind of going on inside the world. Just kind of a neat little feature. It also gives you an idea of things like terrain as well, depending on how much time you spent in generating this. But you can see very clearly it's kind of a rough area. Obviously, if we're sitting over here, we're well above the ground. It's going to look like this. My favorite of all, which I didn't put any in the scenario, is when you have satellites, everything is pitch black because you're up so high. But this is a
Hmm.
neat, relatively new feature that Command has as well. So that's basically all your views. Again, my personal favorite view, I almost always find myself living in Sentinel land, although from time to time I'll shut everything off just to make it a little easier. From a map design perspective, I really like the relief layer, and I really like land cover to know where I put my units. Any other comments on the view page?
There's one tool on this menu called the range and bearing tool. I use that all the time. I almost always never get it through the menu. I use the shortcut Control
Control
D.
D.
Yeah, and it just
Yes.
shows you a distance and a bearing for any vector on the globe.
Now, is this magnetic or is this true?
Everything's true in command.
Gotcha.
By that we mean like magnetic north versus true north. Command, we assume all the compasses are set to accommodate true north. It's actually pretty far off for where I live in rural Canada. Magnetic north and true north, I think, are like 20 some degrees off. So it's
That's
quite
incredible.
yeah, quite a difference. But we just assume in command everything's true north.
Gotcha.
Uh,
And that
yeah,
also affects the rotation of the map. So if
yeah,
I click and hold my right mouse button and go like this and drag it this way, notice there's no rotation Google Earth style when that
yeah.
happens. All right, awesome. So Control D, by the way, is your shortcut click and drag. Wonderful tool. If you click on something and actually move your mouse away from it, it will also tell you the distance, but it won't give you that pesky bearing. So if you need that bearing, you're going to be looking for that tool as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at map settings, also known as why are there so many crazy shaped circles all over my screen. Now, basically, your map settings are going to be dictating the different ranges of your sensors and weapon systems. And a relatively new feature is how far your aircraft can continue flying in the air, which is actually, again, we didn't have this in Commando, we have this now. One thing I will do before we start playing with these individual settings is just to point out that you can actually dictate what symbols you're actually watching on the screen. Right now, I have it set to all units, so I'm also seeing enemy platforms ranges. If I just wanted to see the range of the unit I'm clicked on, you can set it to selected unit. Or for
Hmm.
those of you who really don't want to see anything, you can set it to do not show. And now you're going to be relying on basically your eye to know whether or not you're in range for something.
Yeah. Great way to declutter the screen.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with that. Personally, I don't think I ever use this unless I'm building a mission. I always use selected unit, but again,
Yeah.
do what works for you. So basically, your top half are going to be for your sensors, your bottom half are going to be for your weapons. So clicking on our Boeing Fighter Attack Model 18 2008 Lightning Edition serial number 315488285, you can see that it has two different separate circles here. It has basically a very close range. I believe this is going to be for its gun. It's going to be air to ground as well as air to air. And then you have this longer range circle, which is going to be representing, just by taking a look here, by the color that it represents surface weapons. Although I believe for this one, this would be air weapons as well. Yeah, it's Maverick Arms, so it's going to be its air weapons. So if I shut this off, you'll notice that I no longer see what the maximum range of the air-to-air weapons of the F-18 are. That would also include, if I clicked on this carrier battle group here, which you can see I can no longer see their air-to-air weapons as well, unless I flip that back on, in which case you can see their range of basically the surface-to-air missiles. This is a great tool for making general judgments. One thing I will warn, and Baloogan will expand in a second, is just because something is in range does not necessarily mean you can hit it. With some
Yeah.
older radar systems, you will not have a good enough or reliable enough track at long distances. So even though you have, say, a 150-mile range, you won't necessarily be able to it. The other problem you get, especially at very long distances, is the Earth is curved. You can actually have a unit that's so low that it's hiding behind the curvature of the Earth, or these beautiful mountain ranges over here in Saudi Arabia. Any comments on that?
Yeah, it's not just the masking effects of terrain, but it's also the motion of the unit. This is most obvious with torpedoes. So a submarine that launches a torpedo that is going after a ship, the submarine has to assume that the ship is going to run away from the torpedo. And so a torpedo might have a 60 nautical mile range on paper, but really that means like a 15 nautical mile range from the submarine's perspective as to the range that it can shoot at, because the torpedo assumes that it has to chase the ship
Absolutely.
and that the ship's going to run away as fast as possible.
Yeah, and this also could be modified by weapon release authorization, which is
Yes.
something for a brand new video. So
Yeah.
don't worry about that yet. So that's going to be your ranges. Another new feature right here is aircraft range. This
Yeah, you'll
basically, if you
probably have to zoom out to see that.
was gonna say it's an F-18, so it's gotta have a pretty good
Yeah.
reach here. And you can see it actually projects based on its current fuel consumption as well as capacity of what the range of this particular aircraft is. Now,
Yeah.
just without getting too ahead of ourselves, if we told him to go, say, afterburner, you'll notice that ring changes shape pretty darn quick because now he's burning more fuel. If I set him to loiter, that ring will of course expand as he changes speed. It's a very,
Yep.
very cool, it's a very, very new feature, which I think is absolutely great. I like that stuff. Coming on next, we have what they call non-friendly range symbols. This is handy, but of course, because we told all of the range symbols to turn themselves off, you don't see most of these if we flip it back on. Now you can see that you have these dashed lines around certain enemy units. Now the colors for these correspond the same as the colors up here. So for example, this white dashed line, that would be the air sensor distance. Getting a little
Hmm.
bit closer to our big angry Sams here, I think these are SA-3s. Yeah, they're the Bs. You can see that this would be the surface to air missile range. Again, like I said, just because you're in range doesn't mean it will fire. You have to be within the dynamic launch zone, which is a video for another day.
Yeah.
Any comments on that?
No, I think you covered it. So dashed lines are enemy circles.
Absolutely. So this
Yeah.
is a neat feature too. This one basically takes, like, if you have a pretty good amount of sensors in this carrier group right now, and what this feature does is it actually links them together to give you one full circle of coverage. Sometimes that's handy as far as rendering the map without lagging your computer handy, but other times it also kind of masks some of the information you could be getting from that unit. If I shut this off real quick, oh no, the clutter's back. But at least I can see that there's multiple units looking at different ranges at a particular target. Now, if I zoom in, look at how many crazy shapes there are here. But the moment, of
Yep.
course, if I flipped up to merge, now I know that there are weapons that are in range at this distance, but I don't necessarily know which one of the platforms unless I do a little bit of deduction here. So it's a really, really neat strategy, but at the same time, it kind of declutters things really effectively. What about sonobuoys?
So yeah, sonobuoys are little, basically immobile UVs, like little drones that are dropped by helicopters and aircraft that fall into the ocean and deploy a special sonar and a radio so they can talk to the aircraft that dropped them and let that aircraft know if they hear any subs. And so they get very cluttered. They cost, they're pretty expensive, but they're dropped in the hundreds by modern naval formations. And so they can really command models every single one individually, including the data link and the channel exhaustion of each sonobuoy. By that I mean, if you have a field of hundreds and hundreds of sonobuoys, you can only listen to a certain subset of them at one time. But basically, they jam up the screen. They completely cover the entire world in a real ASW scenario. And so we have different options for turning them off, for
Okay.
making them ghosted or making them just invisible. And
Yeah.
often the only option is to make them invisible because
Yeah,
there's
it
just so
gets
many.
chaotic pretty quickly.
Yeah,
But again, that'll be something for another day. Reference
yeah.
points are basically these little dots that you can place. You can insert one by hitting Control Insert. It becomes an X. If you click on it, it'll actually have a little name attached to it. Now, this one down here is a little different because it's locked. We're going to cover reference points in great detail when we talk about missions, but just know that this feature up here basically enables you to make them big. You can make them teeny tiny, or of course you can shut them off because they can get a little crazy once you assign 30, 40 missions at a time. So
Yeah.
now we're going to take a look at the more confusing items under the map setting, and that's these vectors down here. Illumination is basically a fancy way of saying that I'm pointing my active sensor at you. So, for
Mhm.
example, if I were to take this F-18 and that doesn't make much sense. If I were to take a SAM unit and try to attack an F-18 with it, it would show a line to it to indicate that he's basically illuminating him with his fire control radar. I believe that's fairly accurate, correct?
Yeah, yeah, that is accurate. Certain ships and certain SAM sites have a limited number of these illumination channels, and that is a big reason how SAM sites can be penetrated. Like for example, Aegis, I think you
Oh,
can track up
jeez.
to 64. You can track a number of incoming missiles, but you can only like a Burke class ship only has 3 illumination radars, which means it can only shoot missiles at 3 targets at a time. And so that becomes pretty stressful when you have 20 missiles coming in. You have to allocate the missiles to the radars, and your radars can be damaged. Your illumination channels can be damaged, and that can really screw you up.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing I'll say is The only three options you have here is you can turn on for the selected unit, all the units or none. If you've got a very complicated scenario with a lot of missiles and aircraft coming at, like an Aegis cruiser, for example, this can get extremely cluttered very quickly.
Yeah.
That also is very similar to targeting vectors. The difference being with targeting vectors, it's basically going to show a line between the person attacking and the thing attacking. So, for example, if I grab my F-18 and I did an automatic attack, again, we'll talk about that in another minute, you can see now that we've got this little green line saying that we're attacking this. Now, of course, if I use that to attack everybody, and then I went over here and used that to attack everybody, you can see how that starts to get very cluttered very quickly. So the trick there is you can go to targeting vectors, set it either to selected unit, or personally, I just set it to none,
Yeah.
but it can
I
be
do that
helpful.
too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Data blocks. Data blocks are basically these little chunks of text and speeds and things like that. You can set whether or not we get it for just the thing I'm clicking on. You can also set it, of course, so that everybody has their data blocks on at once, which, again, it can get very cluttered very quickly, which is one of the
Hmm.
reasons why this menu is your best friend, by the way. Or,
Yeah.
of course, you can set it to none. The shortcut key, by the way, is you can hit the asterisk key on your numpad, and you can actually surf between it. Now, one thing I always hate with these is when you have groups of units, when you turn those on, it starts getting very cluttered very quickly. So you want to
Yeah.
be very careful with that. Just take a look here. Contact emissions. Why don't you tell us a little bit what that is?
Sure. Yeah. So command models every single sensor individually, and many something that was discovered in World War II is that you can actually listen to where a sensor is coming from and detect that sensor's emissions and classify, oh, this radar sounds like a civilian ship. Oh, this radar sounds like a civilian aircraft. Oh, this sounds like the radar from a battleship. And you can classify different sensors based off of that, just based on what electromagnetic radiation that they're putting off. It's kind of like passive sonar, but for radars, in a
ESM.
sense.
Yeah. So in this case, just a quick example, you'll notice above this Skunk 45, there's a little thing that says radar, navigation. If I click on the contact report, you can actually get information as well as possible types of contacts this particular ship can be. Now keep in mind, this is getting a little fancy, but there's different types of ESM with different sensitivities and qualities. But again, that's for another day. Just know
Yeah.
that basically with this setting that you can select if you want it selected contact, you can also dictate whether you want. Now one really cool feature is if you come down here, you can tell it to give you all emissions, just fire control emissions, or I love this one, all emissions for the contact I'm clicking on, and fire control only for the rest. Now, when there's a fire control radar turned on, it will actually turn bright red to let you know something's trying to lock and fire a missile. Fire control, by the way, is going to differ from search, is going to differ from some of the other types of radar as well. And obviously, there's going to be no warning of emissions if it is a passive sensor, such as a camera.
Yep.
All right, so the next one, again, just moving really quickly down that list here, is we have plotted courses, which basically allows you to click on a unit and then see where it intends to go. So in this case, it's plotted to be this way. Again, we'll talk about
Yeah.
this in a
So
different
that gray
video.
line with those little dots on it, that's where the aircraft is intending to go. It'll
Yes.
follow those legs of its course. It'll get to a point, and then it'll go to the next point.
Absolutely. The key
Yeah.
thing to watch out here is if this aircraft has some kind of evasion turned on for it, there's a pretty good chance that it might not necessarily follow this if it gets attacked. So
Yeah.
sometimes it does really annoying things like jump off. Speaking of get attacked, what is this?
Yeah. So that red area often indicates that that's a no-fly zone, which means that your aircraft, your units, are not allowed to go in there. They'll uh, they'll pathfind around it. They'll try and find a way around it, but they're just not allowed to go in there. Like for example, now that aircraft, since you told it to cross that zone, it's decided, oh, we'll figure out a way to do that, and it'll go around through the north. This is often used to denote countries that you don't want to have involved in a fight. So, for example, you might want to have a Iranian scenario, but you're not allowed to fly over Saudi Arabia,
Hmm.
or you're not allowed to fly over Iraq, and that just tells units, both your units and AI units, that you're just not allowed to go there. It's really helpful for you can create your own and you can set them around SAM sites if you want. You can set up no-fly zones around SAM sites if you don't want your aircraft to fly over them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really effective way to do it. Keep in mind, these zones are set by type of unit also. So you
Yeah,
could have a no swimming zone, but you can have a flying zone and vice versa. Now, one thing I will say the opposite of this is also true. It's kind of like a Unix permission. But basically, you're in a situation where this whole world I can fly around it. So if I wanted to somehow take the very long way to get around somebody who built one of these, you technically can. but that's poo-poo on the designer not thinking that through. Just because you
Yeah.
cross into another country doesn't necessarily mean anything bad, unless of course they're willing to defend themselves based on that scenario.
Yeah.
It's kind of neat. Scrolling down, we have mission area and course. Basically, this is going to tell you what the area is that is in a mission. We're going to talk about this in more detail in a different video. Coming down here, we have this feature, which I don't think I've ever done intentionally, but some people kind of like it, and that is track feet target. So basically, when you turn this on, anybody you've selected, you will follow. So if I were to speed up time here, you'll notice the map kind of goes wee and kind of follows along with them. Do you ever
Yeah.
find yourself using that?
No, not really. The only time I've ever really used it is when I was doing live streams a long time ago, years ago. I would before this live stream started, I would set up command and I'd have it track a satellite going over the Earth,
Oh, that's
just as
cool.
a kind of a thing to have on the screen. It's not very useful in practice.
It just looks cool. Again, we have
Yeah,
3D view now, so it's not bad. Which brings
yeah,
us to our last three items here, finally. First is our line of sight tool, also called lag. That's right. It's
yep,
a lag operating system. Yeah, the lag operating system tool. So what this does is this basically allows you to click any unit in the game and tell it what its maximum radius is, what the target's altitude is, and it will highlight the map to tell you where that's visible. So in this
yep,
case, my little TPS 43G here, just kind of chilling in this valley, if there's a target that's only 30 feet off the ground, 10 meters, that you're not going to be able to see it unless it's in this highlighted zone. Now, if the target, of course, was coming in at, let's say, 100 meters, make sure you click refresh, by the way, notice how many more places that radar now has the ability to spot that unit. You can set the max distance here. So, of course, if we had a target that was, let's say, 1,500 meters, look at all the possibilities of engagement, I should say detection. Now, of course, that also means for you as the player, if you knew that this radar site was here, you could use this tool almost in reverse as a way to predict where you would need to send in your units in order to basically safely get around this. So if I'm launching Tomahawks at this site, I'm promising you it's coming from back here. I would not send
yeah,
it here because it would just be too visible. Of
yeah.
course, the good news is if you close the screen, it gets your control right back. Any comments on that?
No, I think you just about covered it.
Awesome. So that's a cool tool, but it's one of those that I find myself using more as a scenario designer. A lot of times I just use the relief and kind of feel it out. Which brings us to the mini maps. Now, this is again kind of a new feature. I kind of like this a lot. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the mini maps here?
Sure, they're just tiny little maps that you can have on your main map. You can right click on them to zoom to a new location. One of them is global. One of them fits itself to the size of the scenario. So I think the one that you don't have is the probably one of the more useful ones is this one. It fits itself to the scenario region, so you can see what's in the region and just have a focused little mini map on being able to jump to different spots. Yeah, it's just a kind of like a little helper window there.
Yeah, I'll put it up in the Command and Conquer slot up there. But
Yeah,
these are
yeah,
absolutely great, especially the scenario. And again, the other one, of course, if you zoom in, it will zoom in with it. It seems to be a little bit of an update delay on this, but I think it's pretty effective for giving you a general idea of what's going on. You know, if you suddenly see something red and then get a warning down in your message log, it's going to be pretty easy to just go like this to immediately identify where that new contact is. So I think
yeah.
that's it's a handy tool. And that which brings us to the final item, and that's the terrain type legend. But we talked about that already. It's basically if you have the land cover option turned on, this will correspond with what the individual colors are. Of course, this part of the world isn't going to be nearly as exciting as trying to go to this part of the world when it comes to terrain cover. Shut off the BMG. Oh, yeah, look at that. Now that's
There
what
you
I
go.
call
Yeah,
variety. All right, any last
yeah, yeah.
comments?
No, I think we've got it.
Okay, so that's basically all your map editor settings. In general, when I pick things, I really like the Sentinel layer and I really like the Stamen Terrain level. But again, when you're doing maps, I use those. For map settings, I really like the selected range option, but everybody's going to be a little different. And when it comes to sono buoys, don't click that option, please. That means if you're in the world map and you drag a box like this, you're going to end up grabbing every single one of them. And there could be 1,000 of these things operating simultaneously. All
Yeah,
right, hopefully you found this enjoyable. Next time we'll take a look at how to control units. Enjoy.
yeah. Cheers, guys. Bye.